Arnold Schwarzenegger sucked up a whole bunch of our budget. What we had left to make the movie wasn't a lot. It was around, as I said, around $4 million for a pretty ambitious film with a lot of big action sequences. And as anybody knows, night street photography can be expensive. Big action sequences are expensive. Big stunts are expensive. Visual effects, creating a future world is expensive, and doing prosthetic makeup can be expensive. But, you know, I also knew that it could be done on a shoestring because I'd worked for Roger Corman for a few years, and we'd done all that stuff. So once again, the key was preparation. So clearly these storyboards were drawn in that 6-month interval after I knew I had Arnold and I had time to plan. So this is clearly, Arnold has been, his likeness has been incorporated into the storyboards. So he enters the room, he's a shadowy figure, he turns on the light. We see the effect of Reese's firing back at him and the car chase and the crash and everything. His eye has been smashed, it's swollen shut. We're starting to realize that he's partially biological, that he's a cyborg. But we don't know exactly why we don't know yet why he's bulletproof. We don't know we don't know that he has this endoskeleton inside him. We just know that he seems to be kind of bulletproof, but we don't know why. And we're being led to believe that he's a biological organism. He's bleeding, he's swollen, and so on. So it's, in a funny way, it's kind of a misdirect. So he sits down, he looks at a place where his arm was hit by Reese's 12-gauge shotgun. And he's prepared himself in advance in case he needs repairs. He reaches over and picks up an X-Acto knife, and he begins to cut his wrist open. And then I even took the liberty of working with my friend Stan Winston to figure out how we were going to do it, because we wanted to see his hand moving. We wanted to see the actuators, the hydraulic actuators, moving in his forearm. And so we came up with the idea that he would hide his real arm, he would have a false arm, and there'd be a puppeteer underneath the table coming up through a hole in the desk, whose hand was inside a sort of glove that continued this way. It was actually quite a clever solution. I incorporated that into the storyboards. That's how Stan and I decided that we were going to do it. So he cuts his wrist, and then we see him working. We don't see what he's doing. We don't see the surgery step by step. He puts down the X-Acto knife, a little bit of blood on it, and then we see the result of it. Now, I had elected that he basically kind of flayed open all of the skin of his forearm, and we see the mechanism underneath. And this was meant to be the big reveal. He's a cyborg. He's a machine with some kind of fleshy outer coating. When we actually did the scene, we wound up with it being a more contained surgical site, and I don't remember the reason for that. Maybe they just decided it was easier to do, or maybe we were a little concerned about the graphicness of that for the rating. So now let's take a quick look at the scene. Let's see where the storyboard led us. So I'll go back to the beginning storyboard here. All right, so we've got the character coming in a window. Character appears throwing their shadow on a window. For lighting effect, we went with a Venetian blind so that we could get that kind of German expressionistic kind of feeling with the shadows thrown by a Venetian blind. There's a fire escape ladder here, fire escape ladder here. Different orientation, but it's the same visual cue. We're in a higher level of a building. He's coming in the back way, so he didn't have to go through the lobby and up the elevator. He's come up the fire escape. There's some kind of neon sign outside. It sort of tells us we're still urban and we're in some flop house that's on an upper level. We can tell it's kind of a flop house because it's decorated in a very crude way. He walks in as a silhouette. We don't see much. And he clicks on the light and we go to the close-up. Light bulb is in frame. This is tracking very closely to the storyboard. Here's the storyboard. Light bulb's in frame, naked light, and we see his injuries. And that's very much what we shot. So we had a very clear intention with this scene. We knew beat by beat what we were doing. So stylistically, we're right in the zone. We knew what we were doing because we drew it up. It starts with the art. And so these drawings are not only storyboards, but they're also, in a sense, design drawings or style guide. So we'll go to the next series. he reveals the injury, and he starts to do the surgery. And that's literally the next cut. So here he sits down, and the reason we decided to do this was to show the audience that there wasn't a hole here with a puppeteer from underneath, to implant subconsciously in the audience's mind that it is just a normal table. He puts his hand on the table. He reveals the wound. And then he reaches for the X-Acto knife. And I knew that that was a critical cutting piece that we needed. That's this shot. So this was just a 100 millimeter macro shot that we did deep in post-production. I probably did this shot for $20. Shot it myself. You know, I didn't waste time on my inserts when I was shooting with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I picked my battles, and I knew that I could pick up all kinds of stuff later, down and dirty, on the cheap, just by renting a camera and a couple of lights. And I think we shot this on my desk at my apartment. But knowing that you have that cut, now the next shot we see, geez, it looks the same, right? Except it's not. We've gone to this other setup. We've gone to this setup. And now you could use CG and blend it. He could put his hand down, and then you could literally blend to the other practical gag, and it would be seamless. But who cares? It worked. So he starts to cut that same arm that you think is Arnold's arm that he just set down. Now he's hogging into it. We cut to Arnold as a known cutaway that was known ahead of time, planned ahead of time. He sets the knife down. That's this shot. There's Arnold working. There's the knife going down, and then we're going to reveal what it is he's been doing. And he reaches in with a pair of forceps, again using inserts to create tension and a sense of detail. And he's opened up his arm, and we see the actuators moving inside the arm, and we actually even punch in on it. But the key to it was to hold in this tilt down, where we're coming off his face, down his arm. We have no reason to think it's not Arnold's arm, and we see it moving, and through the hole we can glimpse the actuator. So how'd they do that? I mean, you got to remember, this is 1984, so I think anybody that studies the sequence can kind of see how it's done now. But the point is that with a little planning, a little ingenuity, working with the right people, and Stan Winston, he was just coming up at the time. He became one of the top world-class prosthetic and makeup effects designers. You figure it out. You figure it out ahead of time, you draw it up, and if it works in a drawing, it's going to work on film, because film is also about image replacement and image retention. So seeing Arnold put his arm down and then cutting back to a very similar angle where it's not his arm, it's now your effects gag, creates the impression that it's still his arm, and when you cut it open, Arnold's cutting his arm open. So once again, the emphasis here is on planning. When we go to the next sequence where he operates on his eye, very similar thing. The payoff is the moment where he sticks the X-Acto knife into his eye. Well, clearly we're not having Arnold Schwarzenegger stick an X-Acto knife into his eye. So this is what we came up with, that we'd have a puppet head that was actuated by a puppeteer's hand inside the head, and there'd be one person who was pretending to be Arnold's right arm and a completely other person who was pretending to be Arnold's left arm. And as memory serves, I think Arnold was actually one of the people. So we actually got his real hand on one of them. And so, once again, the frame it's what's outside the frame you're not processing. You're not able to process. You're only given what's inside that frame. So here he is cutting into his eyeball, and this is the puppet head, and here's one person's hand, and here's the other person's hand, and you can see that they map very well to each other in terms of how the shot was done, and you're led to believe that it's Arnold, or at least you're not quite sure how it's being done. And then here he's just faking it. If you look very carefully, if I were to stop it on a frame, and this is just kind of looking behind the scenes, there's no blade in that X-Acto knife. We're not going to have Arnold screw around with an X-Acto knife up next to his eye. Safety was more important than us being seen, and there was no digital way to put the blade in back then. Now you could have him poke himself in the face with a bladeless X-Acto knife and put the blade in later and even see it come out of his skin or whatever. That'd be very easy to do. In those days, I just took the chance that people wouldn't see it, and they don't see it because they see what they expect to see up to a certain point, unless you really play fast and loose. There's even one shot earlier in the sequence that's even more blatant, and it's this one. He literally is just raising an X-Acto knife that has no blade in it, but we want there to be a blade there. And I don't remember anybody raising a fuss about it at the time. Now, of course, with internet trolls, it'd be all over the place within 24 hours. Aha, those idiots. But at the time, there was a willing suspension of disbelief because effects were cruder back in that day. And as the farther you go back, the cruder they were. The willing suspension of disbelief was greater. Now, the willing suspension of disbelief is not as great. So you got to be even better. But the good news is the effects techniques are better and they're cheaper. So you meet the demand. It's a constant dance. But, just full disclosure, there's no blade in the X-Acto knife, and it's right there in front of God and everybody, and people want to see that there's a blade there, and so they do. So once again, a very low-budget film that was trying very, very hard to punch above its weight. And when I see it today, it more or less holds up. There's a lot of little cringy moments, but I think it did manage to punch above its weight for its time period, and that's what you always want to aspire to, I think, as a filmmaker working at low budget. Try to look like more than what you had.